having a special guest today. We're having Galdric Nogués, which is a technical manager at Lamothe-Abiet, and he will be doing the presentation. So thank you, Galdric, for joining us. And I'm going to let you start the presentation.
So thank you, Eglantine. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. So as Eglantine introduced this webinar, which is in partnership with Lamothe-Abiet and Bouchard-Valin North America, we will be speaking today about sustainable stabilization. So how to manage the wine stabilities. As Eglantine mentioned already, it's a pretty big topic and something that we face more and more in the wineries. So it is, of course, important to go deeply in the subject and to understand a bit more how the concept, the mechanisms of action, and what are the different treatments that we can do to fix the breakdown and the instabilities. So I can pass the slide, yes. So just to introduce a little bit the subject, the origin of instability is very well connected to the impact of the vintage, because every single vintage is very different. You have different level of heat, so different temperatures during vintage, different sun radiation. If it's very warm and dry, of course, we'll have a lot of sun radiation, very strong radiations. The water availability is very different year after year, specifically in California, where you can have problems of water availability. And all these factors will influence the vintage. And the vintage itself will influence then the maturity of the grapes, the quality of the wine, and finally, the stability, the colloidal stability of the wine. For example, this colloidal stability is going to depend on the variation of alcohol content. The more you have alcohol, the more you will have a certain shape of colloidal stability. The more you have concentration, the difference of pH as well, which is a major factor on the instability. The ratio of polymerized anthocyanins when it comes to rosé or red wines are very well connected to the color instability. And you have the production of unstable protein. In the case of dry and warm vintage, you have these unstable proteins that represent a risk for the stability of the wine. So all these factors, basically, they are involved into what we call globally a colloidal stability. And the colloidal stability is something that is going to be separated into different parts in the course of this presentation. But first, we'll introduce what is a colloid. So general definition of a colloid is a liquid or a gel with a suspended solid particles. And these particles, they are small enough to keep the mixture homogeneous. So you feel like you have a very homogeneous liquid that you are drinking or working with. But in reality, if you go microscopically, you have particles and water. They are dissociated in the liquid. If you take the picture, for example, you have pure water on the left. You have unstable colloids in the medium with a deposit at the bottom of the glass. And you have a stable colloid on the right, which looks like milk. Milk, for example, is a stable colloid. And these colloids, you can separate them into three major parts. So the protein, the tartrate acid, and the color instabilities. And they are all connected to each other. And they act pretty much the same way because they will all be linked with a flocculation and a defect, which is going to be at the end in the wine, a haze, a loss of color, or a deposit in the bottle. So the main goal is to maintain the stability, is to maintain the wine's clarity, the wine's color as well. But the important thing and the very interesting thing as well with colloidal instability is that when you have a protein haze, when you have a tartaric acid breakdown, when you have a loss of color, it never very matters in terms of organoleptic of the wines, in terms of aromatic of the wines. It's only a question of customers' acceptance. For example, if you go to a wine shop and you see a bottle with a lot of crystal of tartaric at the bottom of the bottle, of course, the classic customer won't buy it because he will think it is a defect and there's a problem with the wine. But the wine is still good, aromatic is still good, and the shape of the wine itself is still good as well. So basically, it is very important for the market, for the release on the market and the good sales to keep the stability of the wine and to avoid any instability to appear. So there is different instability. We've been speaking about protein, tartaric, and color. Today, we will focus only on two, on proteins and tartaric. We'll quickly mention the color in the second part of the presentation, because the tartaric and the color instabilities are very well connected when it comes to red and rosé wines. All the time, for each of them, it is important to think about the storage conditions, because the storage conditions will be very important in terms of influence on these instabilities. Of course, these storage conditions will allow to respect the wine profile. For example, I will try not to store my wine in a room where the temperature will be 30, 35 degrees, because I can promote very quickly a protein instability, for example. Same example with a temperature of 0 degrees where I store my wine. Of course, I will promote the tartaric instability very quickly as well. So there are some stability parameters that are very interesting and very well known today. So if you respect these parameters, you should be stable as well with your wine. And the respect of the storage condition and the stability parameters will allow you to have a certain safety during the release of the market and to match with the customer's acceptance as well regarding the wine's quality that you want to provide and to put on the market. So as explained, we start with the protein stability. Protein stability, basically the mechanisms of action are very precise and very simple. The protein breakdown comes from an haze formation after a sudden rise in temperature. So if the temperature increases very quickly, then the proteins will change shape and result into haze formation. The wines affected are mostly white and rosé. The red wines, they are not affected because of the tannins. Tannins is able to react with unstable proteins. So there is a natural stability of the wine itself because of the presence of tannins. During wines, during warm and dry vintages as well, because of the higher pH and the condition of the wine, we are more likely to have unstable proteins in the must and in the wine. So you increase the problem of having a protein instability. So the risks are higher when it comes to a warm and dry vintage. But there are also other factors that promote the protein breakdown. First, it can be, for example, the pre-fermentation operation. If you do skin maceration, pressing, etc., and you go a bit too far into the extraction process, then you will extract as well unstable protein from your grapes. So basically, you improve the content of unstable proteins and you increase the risk of having a protein breakdown. Then as well, when you use fining agent, but the rates will be too low, for example, you will not remove all the unstable proteins. So there is a substrate that is still present in the must. You still have unstable proteins, and that's the risk as well to see an haze formation to appear in the wine. When you do clogging filtration as well, you always change the equilibrium of the colloid. That means you will remove or keep on the membrane certain colloids that can be protective colloids. So if you remove this protein with these protective colloids, then you can change the shape, change the balance of the colloidal stability, and you go very quickly into an unstable protein. So if you do clogging, basically you increase the risk of having problems. It's not written on the slide, but as well, if you blend two wines that you think they are stable, when you blend them, they might be unstable. The result, like the blend, can be unstable because the colloidal stability of the wine is not equivalent to the blend. So 1 + 1 doesn't make 2 in the one stability. So 1 + 1 can be 3. So when you blend, you need to check the tartaric stability and the proteic stability as well all the time you're blending. So the best thing is to do all the blending before and work on the stability after blendings. As well, the CMC, which we are going to speak about in a few, the KPA and the lysozyme are additives that are very important to use in the right way. There's a lot of recommendation for use that we need to respect, because if you don't, you practically make sure you will have a protein breakdown. So it's very important to be careful when you use this type of products, which are very efficient, but can be connected to protein breakdown if you don't use it the right way. So we'll see that a bit after in the presentation. I'm not an expert in the thematic as well, but due to natural cork, if they have a poor quality, you can have a bit of release of tannins in the wine, and these tannins will react with proteins, and you will create a protein breakdown. And then finally, the storage we've been speaking about in the slide before. The wine left to be exposed to heat, of course, will conduct to a protein breakdown. How does it work? So there's two types of protein, very quickly, that are involved into the protein instability. They are the TLPS, which are tomatin-like protein, which can be stable and unstable, but basically they can change shape and go back to the initial shape, so they're not very risky in terms of proteins. And then you have other proteins called chitinases, which are likely to be very much involved into the protein A's during protein instability. So it all starts with an increase of temperature, and you will create a protein deployment. And these proteins, slowly by slowly, because of the temperature, they won't be able to go back to their initial shape, and they will start what we call the self-aggregation, which means a protein will aggregate to another one, or will do hydrophobic interaction with tannins, phenols, etc., etc. And then this aggregation will start another path, which is called cross-linking, and they will start to increase in size. And little by little, you will see it in the bottle, and it will be very easy in the wine. And this is actually when you reach the step of the hazy wine, which is the final step of the protein breakdown. So very simple, protein change the shape, and then they bond to each other, and then they grow in size. Exactly the same process as the tartrate stabilization. So the best way to avoid the protein instability is to use the bentonite. So the bentonite treatment is basically the most used to prevent the protein breakdown. Basically, on the market, you have two different types of bentonites, very easy, the calcic and the sodic. And the main difference between these two bentonites is the structure of the layers. If you look at the calcic bentonites, for example, the space in between the layers is about 10 angstrom, which is pretty small. And if you look at the sodic bentonite, the size and the space between the layers is basically 100 angstrom. So it means 10 times bigger than the calcic bentonite. So basically, this size is very, very easy to understand, because this size in between the layers of the sodic bentonite is higher. That means all the proteins can fit into the space in between the layers. So the sodic bentonite will be very efficient on the protein stability. It will have a very strong action on protein removal, a better absorption as well. It can have an impact on the color. That's why sodic bentonite is interesting on rosé wines as well. And you have a higher swelling rate because of the size of the layer. You will have a deposit which will have a more lees. When it comes to the calcic bentonite, the space into the layers is pretty small. So we'll have a better compaction of the lees, a lower volume of the lees, but you will have a lower action on unstable proteins. So the best way to stabilize proteically a wine will be to use sodic bentonite. Then the bentonite application is pretty known as well. At Lamothe-Abiet, you have different options. Two of them would be bentosol poudre, which is a sodium bentonite, and bentosol FT for tangential filtration, which is a specific chalcosodic bentonite to use pre or during the cross flow because it preserves the membranes. Keep in mind that bentonite is not always the same. The efficiency can change from a bentonite to another, and as well depending on the vintage. So if you are used to use a certain rate of bentonite in 2022, you can make sure that this rate won't be the right one in the year after or the year before, because the efficiency of the bentonite changes depending on the pH, changes as well depending on the alcohol content, and changes depending on the temperature. So if you take them, for example, a warm and dry vintage where you will have high pH, high alcohol, that's where you will add the most bentonite, because the bentonite efficiency will be the lowest because of the conditions of the wine itself. The best way to improve it is to always rehydrate the bentonite in water, because bentonite acts with ionic interaction. So it's charges, it's basically microelectricity that works with the bentonite and the proteins. So if you rehydrate the bentonite in wine, you already start to deactivate a part of this bentonite. So you reduce the efficiency. So always rehydrate the bentonite in water before you use it to stabilize the wine. As well, we can think about adding the bentonite during the fermentation. It's always more efficient because you benefit from the movement, the heat, etc., from the fermentation itself. So you increase the efficiency of the bentonite. And finally, you can run tests as well to check the protein stability on your wine. I put on the slide this test, 80 degrees temperature for 30 minutes contact, which is basically one of the most consistent we can find on the market. There is other with a lower temperature, longer time of treatment, with an addition of tannins or not. But when you add tannins, you create artificially an instability. So to me, it's better to stick on this type of test, 80 degrees for 30 minutes. It will be the most consistent and the easiest as well to run in labs to make sure your wine is stable. And then you just look at the difference of turbidity, so delta NTU, between the initial wine and the wine after treatment with heat. Always make sure as well the tests will be done with the same bentonite you will use, because as I explained, the vintage changed the efficiency of the bentonite, but bentonite from a supplier to another can be different as well. So if you make sure the bentonite you're doing the trial with is the same you will add on the wine, we'll have a very precise idea of the rate you need to stabilize your wine. And this is not the case if you change the bentonite. The rate can be not enough or too much, and it's always bad for the organoleptic and wine stability. So that was it for the protein. It was pretty quick. Now we're gonna enter the second part of the presentation, which is going to be about tartrate stability, which is most of the time a much bigger problem because there are different methods. So it's important to know what you can use, what you can do, and how you can do to improve the efficiency and to success into your tartrate stability. So first, the problems comes from a tartaric breakdown. The crystals will be appearing below a certain temperature limit. So under temperature, crystals of tartaric will be growing and then fall down at the bottom of the bottle. The wines that are affected, basically, they are all the young wines, white, rosé, reds as well, sparkling as well. So basically, all different wines can be affected, but mostly the young ones. There is also factors that favors the precipitation, high pH, temperature with a cold exposure, particularly, clogging filtration, same way as protein instability, and a color instability as well is most of the time connected to a tartrate instability, and they all go together. When you do a microscopic observation of a tartaric instability on reds, you always find color and tartaric at the bottom of the bottle. And the fourth point as well would be a calcium haze or calcium breakdown, which is going to act exactly the same way as a tartrate instability, but with calcium. And the risk is real if you are above 60 to 80 milligrams per liter of calcium. So 60 to 80 ppm of calcium. If you're above this, the risk is real to have crystal of calcium at the bottom of your bottle. So basically, the treatment we recommend would be tartaric acid, calcium tartrate as well to fix it and remove it, or electrodialysis, metatartaric acid, which is not allowed in TTP, or an acidification with malic acid, which has electronic affinity with the calcium, and you can bond malic with calcium with an artificial acidification of the wine, so you stabilize the calcium this way. But once again, there is no miracle solution yet in terms of calcium. Back on the tartrate instability, so it is created But the tartaric salts itself, they are found in equilibrium in the wine, different forms, KHT, TK2, CAT, double calcium and potassium tartrate, calcium tartromalate, etc., which are all basically tartaric salts. And these salts, they have different solubilities. And this solubility depends on the concentration they show at given wine conditions. And then the mechanisms of action is always the same. Under a certain temperature, which is called solubility temperature or saturation temperature, this KAT, KHT, etc., they will bond to each other under a complex called nucleation. So they will form crystals. And then these crystals, they will stick one to each other and they will grow in size. So it's a crystallization, a growth. And once they are big enough and heavy enough, they will settle at the bottom of the bottle. And that's where you can see them in the bottle. You visually have an observation of presence of these crystals, and you know you are at the final step of the tartaric instability. So to show you a bit more about the colloidal approach of tartaric stability, if we do a schema, for example, of the wine, you have different zones. You have zone 1, which is here on the PPT, which is the stable zone. So after this line, so above this line, let's say, which is the saturation curve, that means here all the salts of tartaric will be soluble in the wine. So there is no crystals, no formation crystals, and my wine is pretty stable. When I go on the left, so I reduce the temperature, and then I increase or I decrease the concentration of tartaric acid, I will follow this line, which is the dot line, which is called sursaturation curve. And after this zone, this dot line, I'm in the unstable zone, which means here my tartaric acid is not soluble. So I will have a precipitation and I will have a creation of crystals. So the nucleation will start on this line, and here I will have a deposit. When I am in between, so at a certain temperature and a certain concentration, I'm in what we call a metastable zone, which means I have a KHT, which is still in balance, but not very stable, not very unstable. So I can have an initiation of nucleation, for example, but it doesn't go until the crystallization. When I pass this line, it's done. I go to a tartrate instability. So there's two options to stay in this zone. The first one would be to increase tartaric solubility by reducing the alcohol or keeping the wine at a high temperature, which is in the long-term vision not very easy and not very handy. And the other option would be to decrease the crystallization threshold. So that means this line to push it on the left and this dot line to push it even furthermore on the left as well. So you increase this area of tartaric stability. And this you can do it with different treatments or different approach in the wine. So these two approaches would be first the subtractive approach with a removal of the potential unstable compounds, or the inhibition of the nucleation and crystallization. So it's preventive or subtractive. On the case of the subtractive methods, you deliberately induce the breakdown of the tartaric, so you provoke the settling of the crystals. When it comes to the inhibition, you inhibit the crystal formation before they form themselves. And the solution would be for the subtractive method, a cold treatment or a seeding with the addition of potassium tartrate. And when it comes to the inhibition, that will be, for example, the metatartaric acid, once again, not TTP approved, but used in different parts of the world, the use of the monoproteins, and the use of carboxymethylcellulose, which we all know about the name of CMC. And these methods, monoproteins and CMC, are very connected to the inhibition of the nucleation. So we stay in the stable area of the wine. When it comes to the stabilization strategies, we've seen just before we have different approach. These approach, they have a different cost per hectoliter as well. So this is an analysis and a study that has been done by the Australian Wine Research Institute and some bibliography as well here that shows the cost per hectoliter, so the cost per 100 liters of different treatments. You can see that the cold treatment and the cold treatment with the addition of seedings, so the tartrate potassium, is pretty expensive compared to MTA or CMC, for example, which is pretty much half of the cost of a cold treatment. And this study is from 2012, so basically 10 years old. So I guess today the scale would be kept, but the cost per hectoliter would be a bit higher. So the benefits of this treatment is that you can treat high level of instabilities with cold treatment, the seeding, or the CMC. Even if your wine is very unstable, you can treat it. But when it comes to the cold treatment or electrolysis, it's pretty expensive, and you change as well the pH or the total acidity of the wine. There is a change in the organoleptic, on the fruit, on the mouth, but it helps, of course, with the calcium stability, because when you do a cold treatment and you want to remove the tartaric, you remove the calcium as well. But as I said, the cost is pretty important in terms of energy, labor, water, process, etc. Cold treatment, because you use energy, there is an impact on the environment, of course. You can lose volume because you have to remove a part of the wine, filter, etc., to remove the tartaric that you will benefit from. You can change as well a bit the pH and the total acidity, and you have risks of oxidation because when the wine is cold, oxygen is more likely to be dissolved, so you can have oxidation and oxygen and entries into the wine. When it comes to the CMC, so carboxymethylcellulose, most of the time when we speak about CMC, we speak about two different degrees. So the first is the degree of polymerization. Most of the time, it's in between 80 and 150, which correspond to the number of glucose units per chain of CMC. And this is very well connected to the viscosity. So the more you have a polymerization degree, which is high, the more you will have a viscous CMC. So basically not very handy, not very easy to use. When it comes to the degree of saturation, which is the second point of the CMC, we'll have a saturation degree in between 0.6 to 0.95, which corresponds to the number of carboxy group which are charged, and they represent an inhibition effect. So it's the efficiency of the CMC that we can have a look with this saturation degree. So basically, when you look at the CMC chain at the bottom of the slide, the solubility and efficiency is given by the degree of saturation. And when it comes to the viscosity, so the easy to use, the usability of the CMC, this is the degree of polymerization that you have to look. Very important about the CMC, the treated wines always must be clean and free from lysozyme. Lysozyme will react very quickly with CMC and create a haze. As well, always ensure a minimal temperature of 16 degrees, because if you warm up a little bit the wine, you reduce the viscosity of the CMC, so it's always better and easier to use, and you promote the solubility of the CMC in the wine. Of course, when you do acidification or deacidification operations, they must be carried out the earliest as possible before the CMC addition, because if you go too close to the CMC addition, you can have a breakdown as well with the CMC. And the wines, they must be 100% stable with proteins before the use of CMC. So if you have instability of tartaric and instability of proteins, fix the protein first, and then you deal with the tartaric acid. As well, what we usually recommend when it comes to the CMC is to always use a small rate of sodic bentonite, about 10 grams per hectoliter, so pretty small rate, even if the wine is proteically stable, because this bentonite will help to remove the thermosensitive protein that you cannot dose with the usual test, but basically they can react a little bit with the CMC. So it's just a preventive finding. 10 grams of sodic bentonite, you remove everything in terms of proteins, and you make sure the CMC can be used properly. So as we said, CMC, you have different wine requirements. The CMC we propose at Lamothe-Abiet is called Vinoprotex. It's a 5% solution CMC with a high efficiency, low viscosity, so the degree of polymerization will be pretty low. The wine requirements, as we said, white, it's pretty easy to use. On rosé, we recommend to always run lab trials because it can react with polyphenols, tannins, and color. So when it comes to white, you can do trials, but not that mandatory. When it comes to the rosé, always make sure you run a trial to make sure your CMC is adapted to your wine and your wine is suitable to receive CMC. Turbidity always needs to be very small, very low, so under 5 NTU. And keep in mind that every CMC in the market is different. In terms of concentration, you have from 4% to more than 10% solution CMC. The efficiency is different, the filtrability is different as well, depending of the level of hydrolysis that you have. Exactly the same way we're speaking about the bentonite. When you do trials on the lab with the CMC, always keep the same CMC that you will use in the wine to make sure the wine is very fit and match with this CMC. So the rate we usually recommend is about 140 to 200 milliliters per hectoliter. With a maximum legal rate by the GTB, which is about 0.8% content of the wine of CMC. We do recommend on still wine as well to use a little bit before, about 72 hours before final filtration, to make sure the CMC is well dissolved and well used on the wine. And when you come to the sparklings, we always have the question as well, when to add the CMC. And basically, we usually recommend to put it at tirage, because if you leave the wine like this and you want to add the CMC at the dégorgement, if you have a breakdown during the fermentation, the secondary fermentation, it can create gushing problems. So if you stabilize the earliest the wine, the better it is, because you avoid any gushing problems related with the crystallization and the tartaric instability. The other way to think about tartaric stabilization is about the use of manoproteins. So in the Lamothe-Abiet range, it is TAPK. Manoproteins, as you know, they are extracted from yeast and they are purified. And there are different types of manoproteins. They are very, manoproteins that are used for roundness, for mouthfeel, and other that are a bit bigger, called stabilizing manoproteins. And these manoproteins, they have a crystallization inhibition effect. They act like a protective colloid that we were speaking about at the beginning of the presentation. And they finally improve the stability because they lower the crystallization temperature. So they push the curve we were speaking about a bit before. They push it the right way and extend this stable area of the tartaric. The benefits of the use of TAPK is that it's suitable on white, red, and rosé. So basically, the manoproteins, you can put them everywhere, white, red, rosé, and sparklings as well. It will totally preserve the organoleptic qualities of the wine, doesn't change anything, bring a little bit of roundness as well. You improve when you use it on reds, we'll see some trials right after. You improve the color stabilization as well, because the manoprotein act on tartaric, act on color as well. And all of this without any energy consumption. You don't have to do any wine transfer, just do a pump over or something, and you mix well the product, and that you will have your best used with TAPK manoproteins. So basically, this is a preventive action as well, exactly the same way as CMC. When you use manoproteins such as TAPK, you remove any step of nucleation. So you don't have any creation of crystal, you don't have growth of crystals. So basically, you don't have any tartaric instability. In terms of trials, so this is a trials made on white wine 2018 with a little bit less than 6 months aging. We did on this trial tartaric control, which is called DAT, for degré d'instabilité tartrique, which has been developed by Stabilab. This is a patent called Onodia on this. And this DIT was 20% on this wine, so it's connected to something very highly unstable. And we could see that at different rates, so you have the control here, which is a témoin, the crystallization test showed positive result with a very low NTU. Filtrability was good. And then we played with different rates of STAB-K, 5, 10, and 15 centiliters, so 50, 100, and 150 milliliters per hectoliters. And you can see that increasing the rates, we finally reach a rate where the crystallization test was negative. So that means with 150 milliliters per hectoliter, we stabilized the wine and phase 2 tartaric instability. Turbidity doesn't change much. We go from 0.4 to 1, filtrability from 2 to 1, so basically no impact on filtrability. And it is very important to check this because doing this lab trial, which is very quickly done, we have an idea of the precise rate we can use to stabilize my wine. So it's a win of time when I want to stabilize. And you can see here the control phase to the STAB-K 150 milliliters per hectoliter after 6 days at -5 degrees. Before and after, you can see all the crystal here. When it comes to the STAB-K, there is no crystals. That means the stability is obtained. Same thing with red wines. Once again, we went through the DIT analysis, so degré d'instabilité tartrique, which is the result here is about 7%. 7% is pretty low. We consider it as a medium instability. And when it comes on this red Médoc 2017, so Bordeaux area, the crystallization test is positive for the control for 50 milliliters per hectoliters, 100 milliliters per hectoliters, and it gets negative when we reach 150 and 200 milliliters per hectoliters. Here, the delta NTU is the color stability. You can see that the more we increase the rate of STAB-K, the more this color instability is decreasing. And when you reach under 20 delta NTU, you consider the wine as color stable. So basically, with 100 milliliters per hectoliter, we were already stable. And when we increase to 150, 200, we stabilize completely the color of the wine, and we stabilize as well the tartaric acid. All of this, once again, without any big improvement and big change on the turbidity and the filtrability as well, because filtrability doesn't change and even increase, which is good for the wine. This wine was with a 1-year aging, and of course we get a positive crystallization test on the control, and it was a very unstable color because above 50 delta NTU, the color is considered to be highly unstable. And once again, because we run these trials on the lab, we make sure that 15 centiliters, so 150 milliliters, will be our interesting rate to stabilize both color and tartaric with no impact on filtrability. To illustrate it as well in terms of long-term vision, when you use monoproteins, they don't go for hydrolysis over time, so they stick in the wine, they stay in the wine, and if your wine is stable, it will stay stable over time. These are two wines from North Médoc and South Médoc, so two regions in the north of Bordeaux, 2007. One was treated without, one was controlled, so without STAB-K, and the other one, same wine, was treated with 15 centiliters, so 150 milliliters per hectoliter of STAB-K. We kept the wine in bottles for 2 years, and then we ran some filtrability tests to check on the membrane what was obtained and what was clogging for this wine. And you can see that the control here, there is a lot of coloring matter, a lot of color that remains on the membrane, when here, there is not a lot of deposit. In the South Médoc, it's even worse. You have a pretty clean membrane in the case of STAB-K. When in case of the control, when it comes to the control, you have a lot of color that is present on the membrane, which means the color stability was not good for this one and for this one, and was much better for STAB-K in both cases. So there is really a strong effect a strong combined effect between tartaric and color stability when it comes to the monoproteins. And this is what we can observe on the membrane if you do a microscopic observation times 400. You can see here crystals of tartaric, and these big red points are anthocyanins that precipitated due to the action of the tartaric. So both of them were unstable. So to sum up a little bit about the StabK, the wine requirements, we have a bit less than the CMC, so the wine need to be filtrable. So there has to be a good filtrability. The delta NTU, as much as possible, should be under 20, but anyway, the StabK will improve this delta NTU, so will improve the color stability. StabK, once again, belongs to the MP-Caron group stabilizing monoproteins, so it's a specific natural product. Pretty convenient, easy to use because it's under liquid formulation. It doesn't need to have a pump over, a racking or whatever. Very effective on color, plus tartrate stabilization, so you can work both problems at the same time. Usable on white, rosé, red, and sparklings. It's pH independent as well, so doesn't matter how the vintage was. StabK will always be as efficient as it is, so which is reliable as well for the winemaker. There is no impact on filtrability because this solution goes through ultrafiltration before the production, so no impact on filtrability. And it's really a long-term vision when you use StabK, because if you do aging with wines and you use StabK, you make sure you don't lose tartaric and you don't lose color as well over time with the aging. Even when it keeps in bottle, you won't have any precipitation or deposit in the bottle. The rates are a bit smaller than the CMC, 50 to 150 milliliters per hectoliter. Very useful to stabilize. And once again, we recommend to use it a little bit before the final filtration. So most of the time, 24 to 72 hours before the final filtration or the bottling. Once again, add tirage for the sparkling wines to avoid any breakdown during the secondary fermentation. So to conclude this webinar, we've seen some different approaches, but when it comes to inhibition methods, two products stands out. So the Vinoprotect, the CMC, with a rate between 140 and 200 milliliters per hectoliter. The cost for the Vinoprotect is very small, but it needs to respect some recommendation for use before the addition. So protect stability of the wine, making sure the wine is clean, small treatment with bentonite before, but you speak right now with the Vinoprotect, you work with a very stable solution over time because it doesn't go through hydrolysis and stay very stable in your wine. StabK, same thing, very stable over time. There is no impact on filtrability. The good point is that there is double action, color and tartaric. As well, it is very convenient, easy to use because it's under liquid formulation, and it's natural products, so obtained from a monoprotein from the yeast. When CMC is obtained, I didn't mention it, but it's obtained from cellulose, from the trees. So it's also, in some ways, natural products because it's obtained from vegetal material at the beginning. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope this